Welcome back, and it's just gone 1:05, and don't forget the cricket's coming up at the Adelaide Oval. We'll take you there for the first ball at about 25 past. Now, it might be overcast, and that's why the cricket is opening a little bit earlier today because of the rain and the wet conditions last night. But before we know it, it will be 40 degrees, and we will be head on into our bushfire season. And that's why today I thought we'd have another bit of a chat to the CFS about the threats that the state is facing. And with us is Phil McDonough. I did that last time, didn't I, Phil?
You did.
Joining us, you're the CFS compliance officer.
That's my day-to-day title.
Yeah, so that means you do what?
Oh, almost anything no one else wants to do in the organisation.
Yeah, get Phil to do that.
Yeah. I deal a lot with legislation and legislation compliance and codes of practice and developing those sort of guidelines for different people in the community.
We've also got Michael Kane with us, who is a volunteer with the CFS, and he's been a volunteer for over a decade, haven't you?
Yeah, on and off for 13 years or so.
Yeah. So let's begin, Phil, with the fact that the fire ban districts across South Australia are all in place now.
Yeah, they are. Basically what we do is we try and stagger the different areas of the state because they cure at different rates. And the problem that we have is if we actually bring the whole state in all at once, it restricts some of the farming practices through the community. So we need to remain flexible. So different areas of the state will come in at different times. And just last Friday morning at 1 minute past midnight, we saw the Mount Lofty Ranges, Kangaroo Island and Adelaide Metropolitan area come into fire restrictions.
Now, what does that mean, fire restrictions?
Well, it means there are certain practices, use of certain equipment, and the lighting and maintaining of fires is restricted during that period of time. Now, it doesn't mean you can't have them, but you need to have precautions in place.
Now, we have already seen, haven't we, a couple of cases where lightning has started a couple of fires so far this season, and, the weather hasn't really broken yet. Summer hasn't really got underway. They're things we can't do anything about, but there have been some fires that have been started by people doing perhaps the wrong thing.
Yeah, because we've had such a strange lead up to the season. Yeah, a lot of the farmers were trying to actually harvest and try and get in before the change of the weather came through, which meant they had to wait longer because they've got to wait for the moisture to come out of the crops. So they were pushing to actually achieve this. So they may have taken shortcuts and not maintained their equipment to the standard they may normally do, or they might be trying to rush through and have rock strikes and the like. So we do see a bit of that from time to time.
And that's the onus comes back to the land owner, doesn't it? To take responsibility and not actually, be a little bit not as thorough as that perhaps should be.
Yeah, when it comes to harvesting and that, we have codes of practice in place, and a majority of the community adhere to that. And peer pressure is a wonderful thing in the country areas. But there are also the other activities that people do. So, things like welding, grinding, machining, all of those day-to-day practices now have restrictions on them.
And even though the restrictions are there, we have cases where, someone has had a brain fade and is out doing a bit of grinding, and there's long grass around. It doesn't take much for, a couple of sparks to take off.
No, that's correct. And it all revolves around the dryness of the fuels that are there at the time. So it's a matter of everyone remaining vigilant through whatever activity they're doing, and to make sure they're aware of the surroundings and the impact that their activity is going to have on not only the area they're doing, but the wider community if something does start.
Now, we've had a lot of burn-offs going on, official burn-offs. What about private burn-offs on private land?
Yeah, it is an accepted land management practice, and in some circumstances the burning of native vegetation is encouraged because of ecological purposes. The Department of Environment, Water and Natural Resources have undertaken a burning on private land program where they are assisting landholders in burning some of these blocks, but they're doing it strategically and they're doing it in line with bushfire management plans for those areas. So we're seeing an increase on these burn-offs, and we'll call them prescribed burns because essentially that's what they are. but they're well planned, the resources are in place, and they're well controlled at the time of burning.
But we have had cases, haven't we, in the past of me as a landholder. I think I do the right thing, and I have my own controlled burn off. It goes well. I put it out. I go home, have a stubby. Next day, there's a fire roaring, on my doorstep. We have to be aware that a burn off, in any way, shape or form, can be active for 48, 72 hours, can't it?
We've had cases where 3 months down the track we've had...
That long, is it?
Yeah. It depends on the soil and what's happening in the environment it's burning in, but and we see it a lot down in the southeast where it can actually burn underground for a period of time, and it will pop up at the most ridiculous time and cause us issues. So, yes, you're right. The property owners need to make sure that they take all the precautions they can to control these fires. And we only saw a case at Mount Osman on Friday, I think it was, where unfortunately the gentleman who lit the fire thought he had it all under control, but the wind picked up, took it places that he didn't want, and he actually got caught between the fire and got caught up in a barbed wire fence.
Yeah.
And got burnt, yeah.
Yeah, it could have ended a lot worse, but it just shows how quickly this can all happen. And perhaps you shouldn't be doing a burn-off on your own.
Well, no, and you need to make sure that you plan it properly. It's not a case of looking out the window and saying, oh, look, it's going to be a great day to do this. It's about knowing what weather's coming, what materials you've got, what safety precautions you've got, what equipment. Maybe the neighbours can help you do it.
Let's go to you, Michael. Michael Kane. You're a volunteer, and you've been doing it for quite some time. You began on KI, I believe.
Correct. Yeah, that's where I grew up.
You were in the Pinery Fire, weren't you?
Yeah, I was part of a strike team that was sent to Pinery for the Pinery Fire, going back.
So how is that? I mean, we lost 2 lives in that fire. We lost, tens of thousands of hectares of land, about 90-odd buildings, I think, including lots of houses. We really dodged a bullet in a way. It could have been a lot worse. What's the memory for you?
Probably the most distinct memory was driving into the township of Wasleys, and a lady tried to flag us down, and she said, look, can you help? My house has just caught on fire. Unfortunately, we'd been directed to go to the school, primary school. There were still 14 children at the school seeking refuge, and there was fire around the school. We had to make a decision on the spot. Unfortunately, we can't assist you. There's these children trapped at the school. So that's where we were sent. That's what we had to do. And unfortunately, this poor lady, her house was on fire. But at the time, with the conditions of the day, that was probably the right thing to do.
God, that's a real human side of what a bushfire really is like, isn't it? And do you ever stop and think, hang on, I'm a volunteer, I'm not getting paid to put myself in this danger and go through this emotional grief that I've got to confront myself with?
I think in the spirit of the moment, you don't. You're acting on, to some extent, adrenaline and procedure, and this is what we have to do. We've got to get our job done. So you're not thinking about that. In hindsight, retrospectively, 2 or 3 days later, you think about a lot of those sorts of things.
I bet you do. And, I mean, I'm sure that memory would be still etched in your mind, a couple of years later.
Yeah, definitely. That was a very bad day from a fire perspective.
Yeah. And it was, I mean, Phil, we've talked about this before. The conditions on that day were just astronomical. The wind was so fast, and the wind was so hot. We were very lucky we didn't lose, half the Barossa Valley on that. Michael, on that day, do you appreciate what you could be driving into, you volunteers?
Oh, we could see it, to be honest. We turned right from... I remember being on Grand Junction Road, turning on Port Wakefield Road, and we could see the smoke plume from there. So we knew it wasn't good, and we could hear the radio chatter. We heard there was 2 CFS appliances that were involved in a burnover. We actually heard that on the radio as we were approaching. We knew that it wasn't good, and we knew the weather conditions were horrendous. Had that started in a different part of the state, it would have been even worse, I think. So yeah, we could definitely see that it wasn't looking good.
And you, as a volunteer who goes out there without being paid and puts yourself in this danger, do you get a bit frustrated, the fact that the vast majority of the population don't appreciate exactly what you're driving into?
I personally get more frustrated by people that are over complacent. they think, oh, that'll never happen to me. I live near a town, I'll be okay. Or I'm not in a bush area, I'm just in a grassland area, there's no risk. The risk is there, the risk is real. And people need to realise that and need to be prepared. They need to have a plan in place, and if they don't have a plan, they need to decide to leave and leave early. All right,
we'll take a quick break and we'll come back and we'll talk about that, because Christmas, as I said, 21 days until Christmas. We just gave away the wonderful O'Brien's pork ham. We need to start thinking about what we're going to do over the Christmas holidays. That's coming up next. And good to have you with us. We're talking about the fire season, which will be here before we know it. And we have Phil McDonough from the CFS with us, and also Michael Kane, a very committed volunteer. Happy to take your calls if you've got any queries for them. 8223 0000. Phil, Christmas, 21 days. We need to start planning, don't we? I think an awful lot of people pack up the car, forget their woes, and head off into the great country of ours with no regard as to what might happen while they're on that road trip.
Yeah, that's right. And this is where planning what you're doing and where you're going is pretty important, because you're going to be out of your normal surroundings. You're going to be somewhere different. You need to know what you're doing, and you might be travelling through 2, 3, 4 different fire ban districts for your summer break. So you need to know what restrictions are going to be in place in those areas, and especially a lot of people go away and they think, oh, I'll have a campfire and stuff like that. So knowing where you are and if there's a total fire ban will actually benefit you, because you'll know what risks are around that area. Also, if you're going to be camping somewhere, make sure you know your escape routes and the like. And if you plan properly, you'll have no issues. But there are risks associated with travelling through the country during the summer.
Absolutely. What about come Christmas Day? I want to put that turkey in the barbie. What if it's a total fire ban?
Well, it's great if it's a gas barbie, because you can. But if it's a charcoal one, unfortunately you can't, because it's what we consider a solid wood-fired barbecue. So you can't have them. You can only have them if you get a permit to operate those sort of things. And rule of thumb, those permits can be obtained from councils, but unfortunately councils, when they issue these permits, need to do an inspection of the site, so they risk manage and allow these permits to occur. A lot of councils don't have the resources, and they might be inundated with 50, 60, 70 permit requests. They just won't be able to do it. So plan now, make sure you've got a gas barbecue, then you're not relying on your solid wood-fired barbecue for Christmas.
And also know what that escape path is. If you're camping on the York Peninsula or whatever, you need to know exactly more than one way to get out.
Absolutely.
That's the message, isn't it?
Yep. And just make sure that you've got the information with you.
It's pretty easy. Do you have a little hit list of what you would take in the car with you on a stinking hot drive?
I'm usually working those days.
You are too. Yeah.
But yes, we do. And you can access a lot of the information from the CFS website on things for if you're travelling. There are hints and guides for that. If you've got horses on your property, if you've got different things around your property, what to do around your property, all that information is there.
Absolutely. So just log on to the CFS website. Michael, have you got one last message to our listeners who might be planning on going away at Christmas, or thinking that attitude of I think it's a great Australian attitude, it'll be right, it won't happen to me? You got a message?
Yeah, well, that complacency, middle of winter from a fire perspective is probably fine, but if you're going into a country area, and once again, even if you think, the fuel load's not that bad, it's just a grazing area, I'll be right, my car's a good car. Complacency is not the safe way to do it. The people that got caught in Pinery, one of them was caught in a car trying to escape when it was too late. Lived in a bushfire risk area, didn't have escape routes that were planned. And as firefighters, we do the same thing when we arrive at a fire site. We're always thinking about, okay, if things turn bad, how do we get out of here? And let's have multiple ways of getting out. Let's not get ourselves into a spot where we're going to get caught. And I think the public needs to do the same thing. Don't be complacent. Have a plan in place and be prepared.
And I guess, Phil, finally, and it's not a very nice point to end on, it's not a case of whether this will happen. It will happen again, won't it?
Absolutely. There are things that we can control and things we can't. Once a fire starts under extreme conditions, as we've seen in the last few years, we can't control it, and we have no power to combat it. we will go into asset protection mode, and we will do what we can to protect the community, the lives and property. But at the end of the day, we're at the mercy of the weather.
All right. Well, listen, thanks for coming in. All the best. I hope, we'll keep on pushing home the message so people actually do, realise that our future sits with us, effectively, as individuals, and we need to do the right thing. Not only for us, but our neighbours as well. Thanks for coming. Good to see you. Let's hope the next time we talk, it's not on a more serious situation.
No worries.
Thanks, Phil. And Michael, I hope you're not called upon too often this year as a volunteer.
So do I.
Good on you. Thanks, gentlemen. Just go to the CFS website for more information. There's a whole range of things on there, including the plans that you should put in place and the advice. So do yourself a favour and be prepared. Don't wait until tomorrow, because it might be too late.